Let's go in and start working this shoulder here a little bit. And so I like to talk about the anatomy, so you're not just left all alone, but make sure you're putting in the, this is a strange curve for me, there we go. Make sure you're putting in the clavicle and the S curve. Make sure that that clavicle is butting up against the acromion process, and that the acromion process is shipping back to the spine of the scapula. Okay. Now about 1/3 of that clavicle is going to become deltoid, and the deltoid is going to insert about halfway down the humerus. The spine of the scapula is also going to come in with the deltoid and insert. And basically you're going to get three portions. So you're going to get the clavicular portion. That's what they call it, clavicular portion. Then you're going to get the acromial portion. And then we'll get the part from the spine of the scapula. Now the bulk is the acromial portion. And then you get a little bit from the clavicular portion. The part coming from the spine of the scapula in the back, that has a couple of different ways that you can view it, but we can add more of the volume down here. You'll see in a second. And a really good example is Richard McDonald's The Gymnast. If you study that shoulder, it's an amazing sense of design and anatomy, all of it at once. Okay, so I'm going to take the clay brush. I'm going to pull from the scapula first, remembering that the insertion, let's do it in green, the insertion for the deltoid is at that halfway point. So that's a little bit on the low side. So we're coming down, clavicle kind of, it really hits into the half, or 1/3, I should say 3/4 the way down to the acromial portion. That leaves room for the bicep to sit above that. Triceps are in the back, coming down. Brachialis, ridge muscles. I'm getting ahead of myself though. Although we've got to figure this out with this change in the scapula and what's happening. Do we really want to raise it? Alright, we'll play with that in a moment. So scapula portion. Acromial portion, clavicular portion. A key with creating something that's really thin is emphasize, like this creature is going to be really thin, emphasize a change in plane. So if this is my clavicle, then the muscle isn't really going to just bulge out freshly from that. There's going to be a little separation. In fact, I'm doing this wrong. Let's push the clavicle back, because the clavicle needs to butt into the acromial process like that. There we go. Okay, I always carve in to separate forms. That just makes life easier. And then in the scapula, any part of the deltoid, especially on something that's thin, this is almost negligible. Any part that's covering up that scapula is almost negligible. You want to think about volumes as you sculpt. Okay, anything you're sculpting, you want to think about volumes. So the volume is going to be down towards the bottom. Okay, and that's something I got from looking at Richard McDonald's sculpture. Okay, I'm also going to carve a line under the spine of the scapula, because I want that spine of the scapula to have a lot of volume. I want that to push out, and I want the trapezius above. I want all the bones to show, basically. Let me say it in common language. Let's let all the bones show. And carve underneath them, and then out. And make sure it doesn't add too much bulk. You don't want to add this strong deltoid. But it does have to have some character, some flow. Not sure about that. I want to move that spine of the scapula down a bit. Mostly because I just want to have a nice angle. There. And there. That works for me. Okay. Lots of problems with the form. So before I get too far, I'm going to go in and start to shape it up. So I'm going to use Trim Dynamic. And I'm going to push in the clavicle. Not the clavicle, the scapula, sorry. Scapula muscles. Just to flatten them. And then I'm going to flatten the head of that spine of the scapula, the main form. You can also press Alt, and that's a great way to build volume. Okay, and I'm really going to just dig in. This guy's not going to have much in the way of a trapezius. Digging in until I get to spine. And I really want to emphasize the scapula. There we go. I like that. Alright, back into the deltoid. So, just running long strokes along the form to really help me contain it. Just trying to control these long forms. Okay. I'm going to be happy with that. I might dig in a little back here. So I was looking at it from the side and it just had too much roundness. The roundness was coming out, so I wanted to kind of make it look a little weaker. So I cut that in a little bit, right where I'm putting the green lines. Let's see. Clay buildup. Okay, that'll help you see things a little better. Also, I'm going to set my embed to 4. Okay, I had embed set to a hotkey. And now we're starting to get into the level of form that we did with the thigh. Which is fine. We did the first simplification already. Pit of the neck. Separate the clavicle from the manubrium. Start to define some of these other forms. Get a little hit in here for the head of the humerus, which is going to come in there. Separating the sternocleidomastoid and the neck muscle and the trapezius, really. Sternocleidomastoid in the throat. Okay, so that'll require a little bit of sculpting to get that better. Alright, so one thing to note is that the stuff I'm doing right now I'm not adjusting major bits of form, I'm just emphasizing certain forms. So keep that in mind. I'm not adjusting major bits, just emphasizing things. So I adjusted major bits before when I used the clay brush and Trim Dynamic, but now less so. Alright, so that's starting to look a little strange. And that's fine because the acromion process needs to dip backwards in space and downwards a little. There we go. So I'm happier with that. Alright, so a little bit of work on the scapula. Clay buildup. Okay, I'm going to take the teres major. That's going to come down into the front of the humerus. So I've got to find a way to represent it moving in that direction. The teres minor is coming up to the head of the humerus. the infraspinatus, let's just do that in a nice line. Infraspinatus is doing the exact same thing. The deltoid is overlapping these guys. Okay, and like I mentioned, when it gets to the infraspinatus, it's not very visible. So the key thing is going to be getting the teres major and the teres minor, spelled this way, and then slipping the tricept in between these guys. I know it's tough, I know it's going to take time, and this is an intro and I'm giving you all of this information, but this is the sculpting problem and it's the form problem that you have. So I'm going to use clay buildup, just carving in a little bit. I want to get a separation of that deltoid, even though it's kind of small. I still want to get that separation. And I'm pushing in. I'm going to do the same thing and push further in here for the teres major. So the teres major is going to come about like that. So, alright. Let me just, I got to push in to figure it out. I need to carve in and add. Alright, so teres major, infraspinatus, and then, teres minor, and then teres major coming around to the front. And that's going to be tough. So I'm going to have to isolate the arm to actually continue that. And I'm going to run into some problems. So I'm going to move that connection in and see if I can really bury that and raise around it. Also going to, let's just try to smooth it out when both are visible. See what happens. That's interesting. So I'm going to leave this as sculpted. And then now I'm going to take the arm side of that and then throw the tricept in. This is the long head of the tricept. And then you see long head of the tricept. Then you see the teres major. And you saw before, I'm sorry, teres minor. I don't mean to confuse you. But damn it, Jim. I'm a sculptor, not an anatomist. And then the teres major underneath. So you can see them slipping in between. Okay. There we go. Let's take some of the volume away from this. I really like how this is already establishing a really nice texture. Long head's going to get a little longer because now we're starting to get to individual forms. Medial head, lateral head, bicep. Okay, I'm just carving out a little place for the pectoralis, and then on from there. So, there we go. That's what I would do for the scapula and for this region. Separate out these guys, and then the next section we take a look at the forearm.